to Elmhurst College. My name is Gail Gilbert. I'm the Director of International Education here at the college. This event today is part of the Roland Quest Lecture Series, which was established at Elmhurst College in 1996 and quickly became an enormously popular series. It honors Elmhurst College alumnus Roland Quest, class of 1936, a former McDonnell Douglas engineer who performed design work on the original space shuttle. Mr. Quest was also a boat designer and owner of the Quest Marine Company. He passed away in 1993. The theme of the Roland Quest Lecture Series is Ideas, Inspiration, and Innovation, and that theme certainly captures the spirit of Mr. Quest and of this afternoon's speaker. As someone who has spent my career working in international education, I could not be more honored to introduce a personal idol of mine, Rick Steves. Guidebook author and travel TV host, Rick is America's most respected authority on European travel. He took his first trip to Europe in 1969, visiting piano factories with his father, a piano importer. As an 18-year-old, Rick began travel on his own, funding his trips by teaching piano lessons. In 1976, he started his business, Rick Steves Europe, which has grown from a one-man operation to a company with a staff of 100 full-time, well-traveled employees at his headquarters in Washington State. There, he produces more than 50 guidebooks on European travel, America's most popular travel series on public television, a weekly hour-long national public radio show, a weekly syndicated column, and free travel information available through his travel center and ricksteves.com. If that wasn't enough, Rick Steves Europe also runs a successful European tour program. Today, we look forward to hearing more about travel as a political act, Rick's reflection on how life of travel has broadened his own perspectives, and how travel can be a significant force for peace and understanding in the world, a topic that is particularly relevant for us today. Please join me in welcoming Rick Steves.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail, and it is great to be here. And I've got to say, it's really great to be here considering we were snowed out a couple weeks ago, and I'm glad we were able to reschedule this. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but it looks like most people were able to attend, so this is just wonderful. I've just been in a wonderful rut. I've spent 4 months a year, ever since I was a college kid, living out of a 9 by 22 by 14-inch carry-on-the-airplane-sized suitcase overseas, hanging out with people who find different truths to be self-evident and God-given. And I'm just so thankful I found my niche, and I get to teach Americans how to travel. And as Gail just mentioned, my dad used to import pianos from Germany, and we also have relatives in Norway. So I remember my dad came home and said, we're going to the piano factories in Germany. And I thought, Dad, that's a stupid idea. And then he said, and we're going to go see relatives in Norway. And I thought, well, that's no better. And then I got over there, and on like day 2, it occurred to me, it's just not that bad. It was actually kind of interesting. There was different candy, different soda pop. I distinctly remember statuesque German women with hairy armpits. And I also remember on that very first trip as a 14-year-old on the carpet in front of the TV with my Norwegian cousins watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon, 1969. Listening to the whole news thing in Norwegian. En lite skritt for menneskeheten and a giant leap for mankind, you know? And when I watched that, even as a little 14-year-old tyke, it occurred to me, all my friends back home are going, yay, America. And they didn't realize the whole world was going, yay, humanity. It's just a broader perspective, wasn't it? And then later on, I was in the park, this park here in Oslo, behind the palace with my mom and dad, and I remember being aware that they didn't have a lot of money. They had always wanted to go to Europe. I was kind of a pill, and they were spending a lot of extra money to have me along, and it was really cutting into what they were able to do as two adults in Europe who had dreamed to go to Europe, because they really wanted me to have that experience. And they were just, we're in this park, and they were just loving me like I just didn't even feel like I really deserved. And I looked out in that park, and I can still remember it today. The park was just speckled like some beautiful Monet painting with other families, parents loving their kids as much as my parents loved me. And I thought, wow, this world is home to billions of equally precious children of God. And those little revelations hit you, whether you're a 14-year-old kid or whether you're well into your adulthood, when you are blessed enough to leave this normalcy of ours and get out of your comfort zone and travel. So we traveled a couple of times, and I realized on the next trip that I can do this on my own. I can be a backpacker. So I did the whole hippie thing with your backpack and your Eurail pass. I remember being in the train station in Copenhagen with kids a couple years older than me with their Eurail passes and backpacks and exciting destinations clicking up on the reader board. No parents in sight. I looked at my mom and dad and I thought, I don't need you guys for this. Europe will be my playground. And I traveled, and I used to be a piano teacher. Kids wouldn't practice in the summer. I'm not going to struggle with that. I'll see you in September. I went to Europe every summer. And I was learning from my experience. And it was very clear. I was becoming a good traveler, and what was just as clear is other Americans were making the same mistakes that I learned from the year before. And I thought, if I could just package these lessons I've learned from my travels into a book or a talk or something, other people could learn from my mistakes rather than their own and have a better trip. And I would have a good excuse to go back to Europe every year and update my material. So that's exactly what I started doing as a college kid, and that's what I'm doing to this day. Today I've got 100 wonderful workmates in Seattle in technology beyond our wildest dreams to amplify our teaching, but we're doing essentially the same thing. So you can vagabond as a kid, and you can vagabond as an adult, and what I love to do is be the lead person, to go over there and make all the mistakes. When I make mistakes, I take careful notes. When I get ripped off, I celebrate because they don't know who they just ripped off. I'm going to learn that scam and put it into my guidebooks, and then other friends of mine with a book will go over there and they'll know what's going on. So I've been teaching just like crazy ever since I was a kid, and if I look back on it, I didn't have any grand plan, but it seems like I have a logical evolution in my teaching. First, in the 1980s, it was all about Europe through the back door. That was traveling on a budget, you know, packing light, getting a good hotel or a youth hostel or a restaurant. And then in the 90s, it occurred to me, okay, that was the lowest rung of Maslow's hierarchy of travel needs. Now let's slide up it a little bit, and I was really passionate about teaching history and art for travelers. The cuisine, the culture, the wine, the art, and I wrote a book called Europe 101, History and Art for Travelers. And then, after 9/11, it occurred to me that the pinnacle of that Maslow's hierarchy of travel needs is traveling in a way where you get out of your comfort zone and you gain an empathy. Empathy, what a beautiful word, for the other 96% of humanity. And then you come home with that most beautiful souvenir, and that's a broader perspective. And I would imagine that's part of the reason why students go on foreign study now, is so they can become part of the family of nations. I just love that idea. And I'm going around the country now. I'm going to 25 cities in 30 days. And I am just sharing the most important lessons I've had from this beautiful lifetime of getting out of my comfort zone and hanging out with people who find different truths to be self-evident and God-given. So this is the brand new edition of that book, and thanks for buying them all. They're all sold out there now. But my publisher a couple months ago said, we're going to reprint. I said, oh no, you can't reprint. We've got Brexit, we've got refugees, we've got Erdogan, we've got Trump, we've got all sorts of stuff going on in this world. We got to update the book. So this is brand new. It just came out a couple of weeks ago, and I'm thankful to have a chance to get it right up to date. Now, my beat is Europe. My favorite country, as I mentioned, is India, but I just want to help Americans enjoy what I consider the wading pool for world exploration, Europe. I guess my mission is to inspire and encourage Americans to go beyond Orlando. Now, I got no problem with Orlando, but it should not be your lifetime travel aspiration to go back to Orlando, you know, many, many, many times. If you've been to Orlando 3 or 4 times, consider Portugal. It's not going to bite you. There's only one guidebook in the United States that outsells my Rick Steves Italy guidebook, and it is the guidebook to Disney World. So maybe I've got a bad attitude about this. But that's La La Land, and to be honest, I can't really compete with La La Land. That's a huge market among Americans. But a lot of Americans really want a little bit of reality travel, and that's my thing. So most of my anecdotes are based in Europe, my European experience, and that's mostly what I'll talk about today. But when you travel, my job as a travel writer, a tour organizer, a TV host, and so on, is to bring home the magic, you know, the natural wonders. We got great natural wonders here in the United States. Beautiful thing about Europe's natural wonders is they're so accessible. I mean, you just ride the lift up and you're walking on a ridge like that. Imagine tight roping on a ridge high above the valley in Switzerland. On one side, you got lakes stretching all the way to Germany. On the other side, you got the most incredible alpine panorama anywhere, the Eiger Monk and Jungfrau. And ahead of you, you hear the long legato tones of an Alphorn, announcing that the helicopter-stocked mountain hut is open, it's just around the corner, and the coffee schnapps is on. That is a beautiful moment, and anybody can have it. And then when you travel and enjoy those natural experiences, you come home with a little more enthusiasm, I think, for nature, and that's a beautiful thing. I think travel opens you up to great culture also. I'm your typical American bumpkin. I'm not that sophisticated. And I'm always wide-eyed and filled with wonder when I bump into sophisticated Europeans who are excited to share something. I don't take it as an affront. It's just like show and tell on Monday morning in 3rd grade. They got something exciting they want to share. They're not better than me. They just really like to spend a lot of money for Stinky Cheese. When I was a kid, cheese was no big deal. It was orange in the shape of the bread. Here, cheese sandwich. And when you go to France, these cheesemongers are evangelical about their cheese. I mean, it's like the shop is a festival of mold. And when they see you or me, oh, monsieur, come here. And the cheesemonger takes me over to the goat cheese corner, and he picks up a big moldy wad of goat cheese, takes a deep whiff. Oh, smell this cheese. It smells like the feet of angels. Smells like the feet of baseball players to me, but whatever. You don't need to be excited about stinky cheese, but it is an option. And it is good to know that some people are excited about stinky cheese, you know? So I just really like that. Another great thing about travel is you meet people you wouldn't normally meet. You get out of your comfort zone. And I'm just going to take a quick little ethnicity check in this room here. It's actually quite homogeneous. Hello. Hello. So that's 99.6% the European. Well, that's normal. I mean, you know, we're just comfortable. In my little community in north of Seattle, we're all Lutherans and Scandinavians, and it's just, we celebrate the same way, we have the same tastes and so on. But isn't it exciting and instructive and stimulating to just get out of your comfort zone and hang out with people who see things differently? It's healthy, and it is just, to me, it carbonates your whole experience. When I meet more interesting people in 2 months in Europe than I do the rest of the year back home. It doesn't need to be earth-shaking encounters. It's just you meet different people. I mean, I was in Italy recently, and this little kid was staring at me. He was staring at me. It was kind of rude. Finally, his dad said, "Excuse my son, he stares at Americans." I said, "Well, why is that?" He said, "Well, last week at McDonald's, we were having our hamburger, and my son, noticing the fluffy white bun, asked me," he said, "Dad, why do Americans have such soft bread?" And the dad said, "Son, it's because Americans have no teeth." Now, I don't think the dad meant anything by that. I think it's just what dads do when they're out with the kid. They say nonsensical stuff to entertain themselves, and it happens to confuse the child. So now he looks at Americans to see if we had teeth, and I showed him my teeth to overcome that one little bit of misunderstanding between people. But if you can, you'd be surprised, that's a silly example, but you'd be surprised how many really silly misconceptions there are until we meet people, until we get out there. How do you know what a Cuban feels like until you go to Cuba? Are you just going to talk to the rich kids that went to Florida and making a judgment on that? You know, it's a very interesting thing. How do you know what it's like in Iran until you go there? You going to let Ted Koppel tell you what it's like? Probably, you know, that's how we do things. But if you can go there and meet these people, I think it's much closer to the truth. One of my favorite places to travel is Ireland, because I think in part in Ireland, I have this sensation that I'm understanding a foreign language. I wish I spoke a foreign language, but I don't. But in Ireland, everybody's got this wonderful art of conversation, the gift of gab. They just love to talk, and they do it so well. And the best experience in that regard is to go to what's called a Gaeltacht. A Gaeltacht, that's literally a Gaelic-speaking region. It's a national park for the preservation of the traditional culture. In Ireland, the government prioritizes for family farms. And they subsidize these family farms, and they stay alive, so the kids in the big city can, during the summer, go out and see how the traditional lifestyle is and kind of know what their roots are. These are preserves for the traditional ways of life on the West Coast, where people stand on the bluff and they gaze out at the Atlantic and they say, the next parish over is Boston, okay? And you walk up to these guys, they're speaking Gaelic to each other. That's their first language. They think in Gaelic. And then they turn to you without missing a beat, and they'll speak English. And then when you go back away, they turn back into their Gaelic. And the tourists probably didn't even realize that they're primarily Gaelic speaking. My theory is that they think in Gaelic, and then they translate directly into English from that. It makes them more creative and colorful and flowery in their conversation. But the conversations are just great. I got into a conversation with these guys, and it's just a great memory. I mean, I was talking to the guy after a while I asked the guy on the left, I asked him, "Were you born here?" And he thought about it and he said, "No, it was about 5 miles down the road." Later on I asked him, "Have you lived here all your life?" And he said, "Not yet." So, I mean, if you've got a busy list of castles to see and you meet these guys, forget the castles. You're in Ireland to talk to them. Another great thing about travel is you gain, I think, an appreciation for history. I really wish there was a better respect for history in our society these days. You can learn a lot from history. And after traveling in Europe, I remember I got a history degree at the University of Washington accidentally. I didn't plan on it. I remember waking up in the dorm one morning and it occurred to me, I've got 7 history classes under my belt. 3 more and I'm a historian. Let's push on through. I just couldn't believe they were given credit for this. It was just storytelling. It was so much fun. Why? Because I had been there and I understood that it's real. Today we're living in fascinating times. 50 years from now they're going to look back and just marvel at what's going on in our own lifetime here. And when you travel, you realize history's all around. It's happening right now. We're part of it. We're helping shape it. I was in Berlin on opening day of their new Reichstag building. Boy, that was exciting. It's the Reichstag is the building that was bombed. It was the old historic Parliament building. It was bombed out in World War II. The last day of World War II was on the rooftop of this, Russians fighting Germans. And after the war, you know, Germany is divided. The capital goes to Bonn, and Berlin is rubble. And then suddenly the Cold War is over. Germany is united. The capital moves back to Berlin. They need a new Capitol building. In good European style, they don't bulldoze the bombed out hulk of the old Parliament building. They renovate it. And they incorporate into that amazing building a beautiful piece of modern architecture, the glass dome. And I was there on the opening day. It's free, designed primarily for German citizens, but tourists are more than welcome. Walk up that spiral ramp all the way to the top. Powerful architectural symbolism. It's designed so German citizens can literally look down over the shoulders of their legislators and see what's on their desk. The Germans have been jerked around too much by their lawmakers in the last century, and now with this, it's going to be the citizens are keeping an eye on you. I was on top of that big, beautiful dome on opening day, surrounded by teary-eyed Germans. Now, anytime you're surrounded by teary-eyed Germans, something exceptional is going on. And it occurred to me, and many of those teary eyes were old enough to remember Berlin when it was just rubble in the late 1940s. And I just thought, wow, the opening of this building is a big symbolic thing. I mean, it was the symbolic closing of a difficult chapter in the history of a great nation. No more division, no more communism, no more fascism. A united country starting a new century with a new Capitol building looking into a promising future. It was exciting. I was all caught up in it. And I looked around at the other Americans up there. Not one of them had a clue. And it saddened me. I thought, I'm living in a dumbed-down society. I don't want to live in a dumbed-down society. And we've found ourselves in a situation today, I believe, where powerful forces in our society would find it convenient, more profitable, if we were all just dumbed down. Just go shopping, we'll take care of it. It's easier to make money off of a dumbed-down populace. And when we move more and more into a corporatism, we're going to have more and more interest in just dumbing us down. I vowed then and there, in my little world as a travel writer, to expect my travelers to be engaged, to be smartened up. And I think it's a good idea for all of us in our walk of life to expect our neighbors and our workmates and our customers to be engaged. And I'm really thankful. I mean, I'm just so thankful for public television, because that's where my show can actually see the light of day. It would never see the light of day anywhere else in media in the United States today. Only in public broadcasting can we produce shows that, Only in public broadcasting, really, can we make programming that assumes an attention span, that respects your intelligence, and is driven by a passion not for keeping advertisers happy, but simply by a passion for inspiring people to embrace life in all of its diversity and fullness. I mean, it's almost like a pledge drive for WTTW right now. I was just there last night, so I'm kind of on a pledge drive frame of mind. But it's an important thing to have some media that really is not. It's fun to have corporate media. I mean, that's all sexy and, titillating and exciting and wow. But it's nice also to have thoughtful media that's not advertiser driven. So we develop an appreciation of history. This photograph haunts me. I was just in Munich and I saw a photograph. This is Germany in 1932. It's kind of a hall like this, isn't it? It's sort of a mere thing. And these are good citizens. These are good people that were going out for a rally and hearing this very charismatic, angry politician that knew how to strike a chord with his base. And boy, oh boy, imagine being caught up in that fervor. And it happened all over Europe in the 1930s. And it's happening in Europe today. It's very interesting to look at what can happen with a democracy when a bombastic politician knows how to stoke his base and make it afraid and cash in on their frustrations and promise jobs and belittle the media and tell lies repeatedly and repeatedly to the point where people believe it, and to get people so fearful that you want to have a quote law and order society. You get it all primed, and then you have a Reichstag fire or a failed coup or some kind of a 9/11 in your society, and the little incremental slipping to autocracy, suddenly, overnight, you wake up and you've lost your freedom. That's what happened in Turkey a couple of years ago with their failed coup. And that's certainly what happened in Germany. And it bamboozled a great nation, and it took it down a road to disaster. And Germany paid a huge price. I'm producing a TV show for public television right now. We just shot it this fall about the story of fascism in Europe in the 20th century. And again, it's just important that we recognize that history can call our attention to things that we should be mindful of. I was just in, the European Union is the big news of our generation, and it really came out of the destruction of World War II. Can you imagine being a thought leader in Europe in 1947, sitting on the rubble of a bombed-out continent, thinking twice in our lifetimes we've had to dig out after World War I and after World War II. And if we don't do something a little bit more creative, our children are going to be digging out again. We need to weave the economies of France and Germany together so they'll never go to war again. I was just in Verdun, so the 100th anniversary of Verdun here in France, in the Western Front, where the leaders of both societies calculated that we're going to throw our young men against each other, incurring unprecedented losses, unthinkable losses. But we calculate that they will bleed white and drop first. So they did that. They had that battle of attrition to the point where, at the end of that, half of all the men in France between 15 and 30 were casualties. That's hard to fathom. And today you walk through the former lunar landscape of Verdun, and you see the European flag, and you see the French flag, and the German flag. And I was going to all sorts of sites there this last summer, and I always saw the German flag and the French flag together. There was no sense of who was the bad guy and who was the good guy. There is a commitment that we'll never go to war again. It's just insanity. Germany and France don't get along. They've just agreed to an eternity of negotiating instead of war. And that's just a beautiful thing. And when we travel today, we can celebrate that with the European Union. Now, the European Union has been evolving in an inelegant, stuttering kind of way, 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards since the late 1940s. It's hard to talk proud sovereign nations into giving up real sovereignty in the interest of unity, but unity is meaningless unless you give up sovereignty. So it's complicated. And from our perspective, a lot of Americans are threatened by Europe's social sensibilities, and every time it takes a step back, we think, there you go, Europe's falling apart. Well, Europe is here to stay. I mean, does it need to be as big as with Britain? Probably not, so you got Brexit. What are they going to do about the euro? The Greeks don't deserve to have essentially the Deutschmark in their pocket because you can't depreciate all of their collective value of their production like you could when they had the drachma, you see. So they're struggling with that. But the European Union is here to stay. And you can laugh about the over-the-top political correctness and the idealism and this notion that everybody should have education and health care and a decent retirement. That's just so European. But the one thing that Europe is really a success about is there'll never be a big war between Germany and France again. So in that regard, Europe is a success, and it is here to stay. Now, they've got the European Union is also designed to be a free trade zone to compete with the United States of America. You've just got to have a big free trade zone to be competitive with the emerging markets like India and China, and with America and the EU. And this is an interesting thing to compare. When we think of the European Union, it's about 400 million people, producing about $18 trillion of stuff a year. Now, a lot of Americans are quick to put down the European Union because they don't make as much as we do. So they're liberals, they've got this socialism, and they're just a basket case. Thank God we don't have that. But we are 300 million people producing the same $18 trillion of stuff. So we produce as much as they produce, $18 trillion, and we have 25% fewer people. So we produce more per person, clearly. But that's not the whole story, because they choose to work 25% fewer hours, willingly making 25% less stuff so they can spend twice as much time with their families. And, it's not a right or a wrong, it's just a societal choice. But by any honest analysis of Europe's economy and America's economy, the workers on both sides of the Atlantic produce roughly the same per hour. It's just the United States chooses to have the shortest vacation in the rich world. And the Europeans just look at us and go, what drives you people? When I grew up, when I considered the work ethic, my parents drilled into me that it is the work ethic. You've got to have the work ethic. And then just recently it occurred to me it's not the work ethic. It's a work ethic, isn't it? My Norwegian relatives they don't have the work ethic, they've got a Norwegian work ethic, and it is to work not as hard as us. My Spanish friends have the Spanish work ethic, and that is to work not as hard as my Norwegian relatives. So it's a choice. I'm really thankful that I run my business here in the United States. I'd be demoralized to run my business in Europe. I love to be able to turn on a dime. I can employ people efficiently. I can produce a lot of stuff that's a good value and still make a lot of money because of our American freewheeling system. But we can learn a lot from Europe about lifestyle and family values and sustainability and so on. And when you go to Europe, it is kind of annoying because they play so much. I was in Amsterdam recently, and it was a Wednesday afternoon, and I saw these men in a rental party boat. And these are not students, these are grown adults. They should be working. And I asked them, what's going on? I was writing my guidebook, and I'm thinking, is there a festival I should know about, or why are these guys partying on Wednesday afternoon? And they said, it's Wednesday afternoon. We cut out of work early and we just get together with our mates and we have some fun. Do you want to get in the boat? No, I'm working. All right. So, you've got that interesting dynamic that's different between us and Europe. Big news in Europe in our lifetime, of course, is the end of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact basically joining the EU. Almost overnight, you got 100 million communists becoming capitalists. And in Europe, in Eastern Europe in the last generation, it's been a festival of pent-up entrepreneurial spirit. Of course, they've got some glitches, and everything's not just rosy, but it's better than it's ever been right now in Eastern Europe. They've got stability, they got freedom, they got the infrastructure of the West, because they're part of the EU, and they've got pretty darn good economies. I remember in the old days, when it was so bleak and dreary with these command economies, ignoring the laws of supply and demand. I remember the days when people, if you were lucky enough to own a car in Poland, you would take the windshield wipers in with you at night. Why is that? Well, because they were ignoring the laws of supply and demand. Somebody upstairs forgot to order windshield wipers. Demand exceeds supply. Thieves get wind of that, and they'll steal your wipers at night and sell them for a fortune on the black market in the morning. That's how black markets work, is when the laws of supply and demand are circumvented. Well, now you got the laws of supply and demand kicking in. There's more than enough wipers produced and distributed to meet the demand, and people are leaving their wipers on their car all night long in Warsaw, okay? So it's just an exciting time in Eastern Europe. I want to remind you, when we travel in Europe, one of the charming things for me is the diversity. You'd think as Europe unites, Europe would become less diverse, and it would be all just one big strip mall with chains selling the same kind of stuff. But counterintuitively, as Europe unites, it becomes more diverse. And let me explain why. I've got a theory about that. In Europe, there's three loyalties: region, country, and Europe. If you got a friend in Barcelona, you say, where are you from? He might say, I'm from Catalonia, Visca Catalunya. Or he might say, I'm Spanish, or he might say, I'm a European. If you got a friend in Munich, ask him where he's from, he might say, I'm Bavarian, or I'm German, or I'm a European. Now, in our lifetime, the regions, the headlines have been filled by regions challenging nations. And as Europe is uniting, the nations are fading away, and Brussels is the center of power. The nations were threatened by Catalonians pulling away from Madrid, or Basque people pulling away from Madrid, or Celtic people in Brittany pulling away from Paris, or Irish and Scottish people wanting more autonomy compared to London. Well, now Paris and London and Madrid are given their ethnic groups a little more wiggle room. This whole business in Catalonia is going against that trend, and it's befuddling people. But generally, European countries are giving their ethnic groups more wiggle room, and more people are speaking the little languages in our generation than one generation ago. So this is a very exciting kind of dynamic in Europe. And today, if you look at any city hall in Europe, you'll see three flags on it. You'll see, this is Edinburgh, so you'll see Scotland, you'll see the United Kingdom, and you'll see Europe. Now, England is no longer threatened by Scotland, and in 1999, Scotland was allowed to build its own parliament in Scotland for the first time since the 1700s. And a few years ago, London gave Scotland the privilege to have a vote and see if they wanted to break away. When you think about Spain, you've got 4 languages in Spain. If you go to a Subway sandwich shop in Madrid, you're very likely to see 4 languages on the menu, and they're all Spanish languages. If you go to the ATM machine in Barcelona, the top 4 languages are Spanish. On the upper left is Catalan for the Catalan people in Barcelona. Across from that is Espanol for most of the Spanish. Below that you've got Gallego for the people of northwestern Spain, and across from that Euskara for Basque people. Then you've got a button for the German-speaking people, the French-speaking people, the English, and on the lower left, a button for everybody else. Now, if you were to go to Basque Country, you would find the same 4 buttons on the top. You would have Catalan on the ATM language buttons in Basque Country, not because Catalonians wouldn't be able to speak English or Spanish to use that machine and get their money out, but as a matter of solidarity for their fellow victims of the tyranny of the majority. The Basque people will respect the Catalans for their struggle. They deserve to have their language up there just as much as the Basque people do in Catalan, do you see? So it's very interesting to get caught up in that in your travels, to realize there's this pride in the different regions, and it shows itself all over the place, and Brussels supports it. This man is I consider him the Indiana Jones of Tyrolean archaeologists. His name's Armin Walsh, and he's an archaeologist in the Tyrol. And he's got all of these projects that cost a lot of money. He wants to renovate medieval castles so people better understand Tyrolean history. Now, he needs money, and he doesn't go to Vienna because he'll get nothing. He goes to Brussels. And he doesn't go to Brussels and say, I've got a great idea for Austria, because he'll go home empty-handed. He's smart. He goes to Brussels and he says, I've got a project for the Tyrol. And he gets millions of euros. Why is that? Because Brussels understands the wisdom of supporting honest ethnic regions instead of false political units with lines drawn after wars to keep the powers happy. And Europe is paying a lot of price right now for ignoring those lines in the past. I mean, think about it. In the Mediterranean basin right now, a century ago, European powers essentially drew lines in the sand, ignoring tribes and ethnic regions and religious differences, and they said, let's make that Libya, and let's make this Iraq, and let's make that Syria. Nonsense countries that could only be held together with a strong man. Now, 100 years later, we're in a democracy kick, and we say, oh, they're not democratic, we got to get rid of them. So we get rid of Saddam Hussein, we get rid of Gaddafi, and Assad is on his way out. And what happens is those countries fall apart. And then you've got literally millions of refugees knocking on Europe's door. Europe is having these refugees today because 100 years ago they created fake nations, and 10 years ago they got rid of the strong-arm dictators of those nations, and they fell apart. So it's a complicated mess when you ignore ethnic realities. The Tyrol is part in Italy and part in Austria. And as I mentioned today, those little ethnic regions around Europe are thriving. More people are speaking the little languages today than in the old days. A long time ago, you couldn't teach your kids Catalan in Barcelona. It was outlawed. Now, kids speak Catalan at home, they learn Catalan in school, and they learn Spanish as a second language because of the European Union. In the European Union, it's a family of 25 or so nations, and everybody gives money in. Rich countries give in more than they take out. Poor countries put in less than they take out, because it's only as strong as its weakest link, and the rich countries are subsidizing the poor countries. I remember when I first started traveling, the 4 poor countries in Europe, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Greece. Those 4 countries had no freeways. Now they're laced with German-style freeways. And usually when you see a new freeway like you see here in Ireland, it says, with a European flag, this project has received 85% financial assistance from the European Union. That means Germany and France paid for this road. And they want the Irish people to get out of the pubs, stop drinking so much Guinness, and work. We're keeping up with the United States. That's this whole spirit of we're investing in our infrastructure because we got to play hardball in a globalized economy. All my life I was traveling to Greece, and when I got to Greece, to the Gulf of Corinth, I would get on a funky ferry to cross that body of water. Then, one year, I got to the Gulf of Corinth, and I had a double take. The ferry was gone, and you've got this fancy bridge. When I looked at that bridge, I thought, this is not a Greek bridge. This is a German bridge, somehow landed in Greece. Why? So German trucks filled with gummy bears could get over that body of water into the Peloponnesian Peninsula and make the sail, all right? So that's why Germany would spend money for a bridge in Greece or bail them out when they have their problems and so on, because they trade with each other and they benefit from each other, and it's a fun dynamic to experience in your travels. Europe is investing in its infrastructure like we just can't believe. I mean, it's inspirational to go to Europe and see what they've got. It's messing up my books every year. People are getting into the city sooner than they're supposed to. There's a new bridge, a new tunnel, a new bullet train. I was recently in the train station in Munich taking pictures of trains in the station. Specifically, what used to be cute little birds squished onto the windshields. I know, it's terrible. I don't know if you guys in the back can see that, but here's a closer look. There's a... Man, oh man, when I looked at that little bird, I thought 2 things. First of all, I thought, this is a dangerous continent if you're a slow bird. And then I thought, this is a surreal image. A bird squished to the window of a train. I don't know about here in the Chicago area, but in Seattle where I live, you would never see a bird squished onto the windshield of a train. It just wouldn't happen. I could imagine a bird sitting on a folding chair on the rooftop enjoying the ride with a cigar and a cocktail, but not smashed onto the window. And Europe is investing in its trains more and more so today. They're going faster yet. I was recently on a train in France, and I noticed in the passenger car that the speedometer didn't illuminate unless it exceeded 300 kilometers an hour. Then they were proud of it. Less than that, they were embarrassed. That's 180 miles an hour. It was smooth, it was silent, beautiful pastoral views out the window. Bam, you're in Paris. It's just pretty cool. You got to pay taxes for that, but it's still pretty cool. 4th of July, it's a great holiday. When you travel, it's fun to realize every country's got their 4th of July, different days. Switzerland, August 1st. When you're in Norway, May 17. When you're in France, 10 days after ours, Bastille Day, July 14. It's so fun when you travel to realize that everybody's got their own passions and their own festivals and their own celebrations, their own dreams. I grew up thinking everybody must have the American dream. It's the right dream. The world was a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to figure it out. And then I traveled and I realized people don't have the American dream. They've got a different dream. It's not America bashing, by the way, to leave your country and learn about it by looking at it from a distance. It's America loving to do that. If you stay at home your whole life and never find out what we are compared to the other 96% of humanity, that's not patriotic. That's something, I don't know what the word is for it. But I love to travel, learn about my country from a distance, and then go home and be more thankful than ever that I'm part of it, and to know how we can improve and what other people are doing. Now, when we think about the American dream, these Sri Lankans have the Sri Lankan dream. My Norwegian relatives, they have the Norwegian dream, and it's a pretty good dream. We're still trying to figure out why they don't want to immigrate here, but you know, they have their own society there, and they've got it pretty well figured out. My Bulgarian friends, they have the Bulgarian dream. And it's just fascinating for us Americans to get out there and learn about that. I love going to Turkey because in Turkey for me it's just a social classroom as a tour guide to take groups to Turkey and so on. And I'll never forget tooling around in the east of Turkey in the shadow of Mount Ararat, gaining an appreciation for the struggles and the spine and the spirit of that nation, and reminding myself that's not unusual on this planet. I'll never forget, we're driving around in eastern Turkey, and there's no famous sites, so you just, as a tour guide, it's kind of a scavenger hunt. You're looking for something interesting. Find a high school stadium filled with kids having some kind of a rally. Stop the bus, go in, see what's happening. 200 high school kids gathered together in the stadium, thrusting their fist up in the air together in unison and singing, "We are a secular nation. We are a secular nation." I asked my guide, "What's going on? Don't they like God here?" And she says, "Oh no, we love God, but considering the rising tide of Islamic fundamentalism just over our border to the east, we are very concerned about the fragile and precious separation of mosque and state here in our country, and we're having a pep rally for pluralism." Whoa. Separation of mosque and state, a pep rally for pluralism. What an interesting thing just to learn that that would be something worthy of a student body getting together and singing songs over. And for 10 years, I watched Germany incrementally losing its secularism. They were the envy of other Western-looking, moderate Islamic nations. And just in the last couple of years, their autocrat, Erdogan, has turned the country into something that's not a democracy, and it's heading towards another Islamic fundamentalist state. It's a scary thing, it's a sad thing, and you can see it happening, and it just reminds me that there's certain ethics in a democracy and pluralism and the separation of church and state that need to be taken care of, because you can lose it. We could actually lose it here. It's hard to imagine, but you travel around Europe and you can see how these things have to be taken care of. I like to, when I'm traveling, thank you, I like to recognize that there are different Nathan Hales and Patrick Henrys and Ethan Allens. I was so inspired by Patrick Henry and those guys when I was a kid, and then you travel and you realize that they're not unique. I mean, ours are great, but I like in my travels to find a present day Nathan Hale that I can get excited about and celebrate. When you go to Central America, it might be Archbishop Oscar Romero. What a man, what an amazing story. I got really just caught up in all that back in the Sandinista and Contra days. And I went down there on several occasions with the Center for Global Education at Augsburg College in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And it just changed my whole outlook on this world, to go on an educational tour. And I remember later, after a few visits down there, I was just burned out. I was tired, I needed a vacation. My family and I had tickets for Mazatlan. And I was just fantasizing about a pristine stretch of tropical beach, swept free of local riffraff, just me and my rich white friends. We're going to have plastic straps around our wrists so we didn't need to get our fingers dirty in the local coins, just all the margaritas we wanted. It was going to be an amazing vacation. And then my friend said, it's the 25th anniversary of the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero. We're going to march with the peasants in El Salvador. Do you want to join us? And I told my family, I'm not going to be any fun on the beach. I got to go to El Salvador. It's almost a perverse thing to trade away a vacation in Cancun or Mazatlan for a trip to really connect with a people. But when you do it, you realize it's a beautiful thing. Archbishop Oscar Romero was an interesting guy. They had a civil war down there. I grew up thinking it was communists against capitalists and freedom and so on, because that's how we framed it here. But really what it was you had a poor society where 5 families owned essentially all the arable land. And if you're a rich big shot and you own land in the developing world, you don't want to grow rice and beans to feed your poor people. That's a stupid way to make money. You want to grow fancy stuff to export north. That's what a banana republic is. So you got to the point where there's no land growing rice and beans in El Salvador for the peasants, and there's no work for the peasants, so they have to work on the plantation of the big shot to grow stuff to export to the United States, and then they have to buy tin can food in the commissary with their plantation wages, and it's a cycle of poverty. It's called cash cropping. And eventually the peasants rise up, and you have to hit them down. In the Bible, they've got this concept called the Jubilee year. It's pretty explicit in the Old Testament. It says every 50 years, you redivide the land and you forgive the debts. Now, rich Christians know God must have been kidding, because that's ridiculous. But it actually makes a little sense if you read the Bible through third world eyes, because I think historically we learn it takes about 50 years for aggressive people to get the balance in the society so out of whack that poor people have to rise up and get hit down violently. In Central America, every 50 years, 1830s, 1880s, 1930s, 1980s, there are uprisings by the peasantry, and the landowners have to put them back down again. But that's what happened in the 1980s. Archbishop Oscar Romero said, I'm going to stand with the peasants. I'll probably be killed, but I'm going to stand with the peasants because it's right. And he was killed, and he rose again in his people. Like, amazing. So I went down to El Salvador and marched with tens of thousands of Salvadorans remembering the assassination of their Archbishop Oscar Romero. And it was a beautiful experience. And marching through the streets of San Salvador, and then we came upon a memorial. And when I looked at the memorial, I just said, no, just wait a minute. This is our memorial. This is the Vietnam Memorial. What's it doing in El Salvador? And my Salvadoran friend said, well, it's your design, and we took that, so thank you. But these are our people who got killed. And there's as many Salvadoran names chipped into this black granite as there are in the Vietnam Memorial. And these people, 50,000 people, and these people all died fighting the United States of America. Now maybe they were communists and we had to kill them. I don't want to get into that discussion, but it is baggage. You have a little country of 5 million people that lost as many people as we lost in Vietnam, fighting for the right to have enough land to grow rice and beans. And that wasn't allowed because that wasn't freedom. That's baggage. And I like to know what is the baggage in different societies, because I am really struck by the baggage in our world. When we were kids, it was Depression-era baggage, it was World War II Japanese and German baggage, Red Scare communist baggage, Vietnam baggage. Right now, it's 9/11 baggage. We've got the political situation we have in our country today, I believe, because of 9/11. 15 years ago, 2,800 of us were killed. It was a horrible thing. I don't want to make light of it. But we've got to remember, other countries have baggage that is actually more heartache than our baggage, really. And in El Salvador, they lost as many people as we lost with 1/40th of the population. And that's baggage. I love to travel and try to understand what makes people tick. Why would Iranians vote for a guy like Ahmadinejad? Must be baggage. Do you remember Ahmadinejad? Just seemed like a nutcase. Well, no, I'm not going to go to that. I'm not talking about that. No, I'm not going to talk about that. But I wanted to know why the Iranians voted for Ahmadinejad. So I thought, I can go over there and humanize Iran by just learning about it and making a TV show for public television. People said, why'd you go to Iran? In part because I think it's good style to know people before you bomb them. It should hurt. I'm not a pacifist. Sometimes you got to kill people. We've got our national interests and so on. But nations are inclined to dehumanize their enemies so we can just kill them wholesale and nobody even cares. And that's not right. So I wanted to humanize Iran because I figured we were going to go there just like we went into Iraq. And we still may. I was afraid. I almost left my big camera in Athens thinking they'd be throwing stones at us. We'll just take our little sneak camera into Tehran. But we went in there with our big camera, and I was glad I did. Because I've never received such a warm welcome on the streets of any place that I've ever worked as when I was in Iran. It really was surprising to me. So we went to Iran for a couple of weeks, and we made a TV show, and it was an amazing experience. I'm so thankful for it. And on our first day, we were walking around, checking out the city. It's a city of 12 million people, lots of traffic jams, and towering, angry, hateful, anti-USA propaganda. Look at that, 8 stories tall, saying, down with the USA, our flag made with dropping bombs for stripes and skulls for stars. Walking underneath that as an American, awkward. Awkward. I had to remind myself that was painted before anybody on the street that I met was born, and they don't have a democracy. It's not a free society, so nobody can question that. So I tried to remember that was from a different age. I was still trying to figure out the situation. You know, what I knew about Iran, I learned from Ted Koppel, so it's just pretty pathetic. That was a media circus. Those people were bussed in to shake their fist at the cameras, you know, just to create that spectacle. And I was in a traffic jam on that same street later on that day. It was just silent. We're sitting there in traffic, and I remember the man in the next car asked my driver to roll down the window. He did this, and he passed over a bouquet of flowers, and he said, "Give this to the foreigner in your back seat and apologize for our traffic." Now that was striking. I don't know about here, but in Seattle, where I live, that never happens. Later on, I was in another traffic jam, and I was just silent, and suddenly my driver just burst out. He said, "Death to traffic." Death to traffic? I thought it was death to Israel or death to America. What's going on? And he said, I said, what's this death to business with you Iranians? And he said, well, in Iran, when something is out of our control and frustrating to us, we say death to that. And I thought, you know, he doesn't speak English very well, and he's just translating directly the word damn. So he says, when something's frustrating and out of my control, I say damn. Damn this traffic. And he's translating in English to death to this traffic, you see. Now, I don't want to make excuses for the Iranian government's bad deeds, but I do think it behooves us to have a little more nuanced understanding of a slogan than just a little bumper sticker thing of death to America, you know. I thought, have I ever thought death to, you know, damn something? Well, sure. Have I ever thought, like, damn those teenagers? Yeah. Now, do I really want them to die and burn in hell for an eternity? Not yet. But it's after midnight. Turn down the music. Death to teenagers, you know? So when we travel, we have these little eurekas. And what's not to like about that? When I traveled in Iran, it's a beautiful place to travel. It's a complicated place. They're certainly not living in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. I was interested in what is their baggage. Why would they do the things they do? And I realized their baggage is incursions from the West. Incursions from the West. In 1953, they had a charismatic, democratically elected prime minister who nationalized their oil, and powers from the West, mostly Britain, came in and threw him out and put in the Shah. The United States and Britain worked on that. And so we could have access to their natural resources. Most people in Iran really didn't care about the oil as much as just their values. And you had some sort of a cosmopolitan guy on the throne who was a puppet of the West, and they were bragging the miniskirts are shorter in Tehran than they were in Paris. That's cool if you're a cosmopolitan big city person, but not cool if you're a small town Iranian, And the big burden for them, the big baggage from them, I found, was the Iran-Iraq war. Every town had a sprawling cemetery. It's called a martyr's cemetery. And I learned that in the 1980s, Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, funded by the United States, invaded Iran. And Iran lost 200,000 people. Now, maybe we don't believe we paid Saddam Hussein to support his incursion into Iran. It doesn't really matter what we believe. That's what they believe, and that's their baggage. And today, you go to these cemeteries, and they're filled with grief as if it happened this year. And when you go to a martyr's cemetery in Iran, and you see a woman who every Friday for 25 years has sat on the tomb of her husband and wept, you think that's baggage. And that's what they've got. They've got baggage. And I just think it's important. We want people to understand our baggage and give us a little wiggle room. And we don't really like to torture people, but we have to because of 9/11, Well, they've got baggage too, and it's legit. It's legit. On my last day of filming, I was on the street, and a woman came up to me, and she said, "Are you an American journalist?" I said, "Yes." And she said, did this one of these things with her finger on my chest. She said, "I want you to go home and tell the truth. We're strong, we're united, and we just don't want our little girls to be raised like Britney Spears." I thought, we've got something in common here. I think we could talk. And it occurred to me right then how Ahmadinejad got 51% of the vote. Who voted for that guy? Who was his base? It was the small town, less educated fundamentalists. Think about it. The small town, less educated fundamentalists. Good people, don't get me wrong, good people, motivated by love and riddled by fear. And that's what happens. And you've got powerful people that capitalize on that fear and that anger and that love, and all sorts of bad stuff can happen. If we can just travel and meet people, it makes it tougher for their propaganda to demonize us, and it makes it tougher for our propaganda to demonize them, and then we can get somewhere talking to each other. And I think that's a healthy thing. A lot of people wonder, what's it like traveling around the world these days with all the stuff that's happening? And I think it's never been a better time to travel. It's certainly safer to travel now than it's ever been in my lifetime. I know that there's what people think is news, but it's actually entertainment masquerading as news that messes up people's ability to separate fear from risk. But statistically, it's safer to travel now than it ever has been. Fear is for people who don't get out very much. The flip side of fear is understanding, and we gain understanding when we travel. It's a beautiful thing. Remember when people said bon voyage? Now what do they say? Have a safe trip. We'll pray for you. Are you sure you should be going over there considering all that's happening? When somebody tells me to have a safe trip, I'm inclined to say, well, you have a safe stay at home. Because where I'm traveling is statistically, and I know statistics are optional these days, but where I'm traveling is statistically safer than where you're staying. And if you knew the statistics, and if you loved your kids, you would take them to Europe tomorrow. It's just the way it is. It's so important that we travel. And when we travel, we'll find people are beautiful, the world is filled with love, and joy and families, and people like Americans. They don't always like our wars. They don't always like our trade policies. They don't always like our presidents, but they like America. America is an ideal, and try as we might, we cannot tarnish that ideal very easily. And that's what people look up to us for. And people remember our valor when we selflessly do things because we care about freedom. Not because we care about their natural resources. That doesn't buy us any goodwill. But when we care about their freedom. We stood up to the Soviet Union, and we won. We stood up to the Nazis, and we won. And Europe is forever thankful for that. I was at a mom-and-pop castle in Burgundy in France. I remember we were filming, the sun was going down, and I just needed to get up on the rooftop quick to get a nice shot while there was still some light. And the dear couple that lived in that castle, whose generation and generation had been in their family, said, "No, we got to have a party first. We don't let any Americans come to our castle without having a party." They brought out the wine and the cheese and everything, and they then brought out their 48-star American flag like a religious relic. And they said, "This is the flag that we hoisted over our town on that day in 1945 when we were liberated by American troops from Nazi tyranny, and we want to say thank you." It's just a beautiful thing. And when we travel, we get to connect with people, and we get to hear that, and also understand what's on their mind these days. It is just a beautiful thing to do. That's the kind of stuff I talk about with this, travel as a political act business. And when I give these talks, I like to talk about all different sort of things. You can follow us, on Facebook, and you can remember that I've got all sorts of books for whatever you might be interested in. My basic, budget travel book is Europe Through the Back Door. I've got about 3 hours of lectures just on these topics on my website. So if you were coming today wishing I was going to talk about packing light, I think I've disappointed you. But you've got a whole lecture there about all those things. I've also got a 4-hour series of art classes, which I just love to give, but it's too long to gather people together for that. But it's free, and it's on my website if you're curious about that. And the biggest part of our work is our tour program. This last year, we had our best year ever. We took 25,000 Americans around Europe on 1,000 different tours. About half of those people were return travelers. For 25 years, I was leading our tours. Now I finally realized 10 years ago that my guides do a better job than I ever could doing their tours, and I've decided to take the tours instead. Every year I just thumb through this book and I decide which tour I want to go on. I get a special price, so it's painless. And I just love it. There's so much to see and do in Europe, and I'm very proud of our tour program. And we have this spirit with all of our guides that we like to celebrate all these different cultures. When you go to Europe, when you travel anywhere, you find people love liberty. There's a little town in Spain that thinks they even have more liberty than we have. This is the hometown of Salvador Dali. And I just love it when different cultures treasure their heritage, like we do here. In Verona, there's a festival every summer where the older kids teach the younger kids how to make a good ravioli. It's just to keep that tradition strong. In a little village in Burgundy where they make great wine, the Chamber of Commerce has pooled its resources to make these beautiful glass orbs where you can enjoy the bouquet of the different wines that they produce. That's just a delightful experience, and in a little town where a good nose is a life skill worth investing in. I really like to go to a community where people happily pay too much for their bread in order to buy it from the person who baked it. Now, that's not my kind of values, because I live in a community where people aspire to have a freezer in the garage, so they only have to go shopping every other week at the big box store, and it's more economic, and you save all sorts of time so you can watch TV. Europeans would rather have a little tiny refrigerator tucked under their sink and need to go to the market every morning to meet their neighbors. It's just their notion of family values. Not right or wrong, but it is stimulating to realize that different societies do things differently. Europeans love their fine wine, and they know where to fill it up cheap. You've got these amazing filling stations for wine, and it's the cheapest liquid you can buy. I'm fascinated by how our society is so quick to legislate morality. And we're on a jag with that right now with what's going on in the political discussion in our society. You can legislate morality, but that means somebody knows what morality is. I think everybody in this room is a moral person, but I bet everybody here has a different morality. And if you were the boss and you could make the laws, it would impinge on some other people, I would imagine. My European friends tell me a society has to make a choice: tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. And then they always remind me of that little annoying statistic: you Americans lock up 10 times as many people per capita as we do here in Europe. 10 times as many people. Either you are an inherently more criminal people, or there's something screwy about your laws. Well, right now, we want to lock up even more people. That's what we're doing. We're on this wonderful, enthusiastic thing of anybody who's different, we're going to lock them up, and that'll make us safer. The irony is we've got so many people in prison now, the more people we lock up, the less safe we're going to be. It does reach that point, but that's a little bit of requires a little bit of thought to understand that. Prostitution's an interesting thing. I don't think anybody would say prostitution's good. You can criminalize it, or you can have a European approach, which is pragmatic harm reduction. It's not good, but it's going to happen. Let's take the disease out of it, and let's take the crime out of it. Let's take the harm to our society out of it. And what they do is they legalize it. Prostitutes are sex workers that join a union. In order to get a license, they're checked by a doctor so they're not passing diseases. And the system is designed so that if they get a dangerous client and they push their emergency button, they're not rescued by a pimp, but they're rescued by a policeman. Now, it doesn't work quite that nice, but that's the rationale in Europe, and it's their idea of pragmatic harm reduction rather than moralizing and incarceration. And it is a fascinating sightseeing attraction, I'll tell you that. I was at a restaurant in Switzerland recently, and I had to go to the men's room, went to the bathroom, and I was just blindsided by blue lights. Blue lights. Ah, yeah, blue lights. I cannot see my veins. They've got a lot of junkies on the street, and they don't want them shooting up in their bathrooms, so they put blue lights in there and they go somewhere else. Now, some of my tourists on my group said, look at these liberal Europeans, they got all these junkies everywhere. They got the same amount of junkies per capita as we do. It's just theirs are still alive and not in jail. Because in Europe, the word for addicted is enslaved. We think of them as addicted. They're criminals. They think of them as sick people, enslaved. They don't need handcuffs and cops and lawyers, prison time. They need a little compassion. They need counseling. They need some nursing. And it's just a different approach. I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but I am saying here in the United States, we're losing 30,000 people a year to heroin overdoses. In Switzerland, they don't lose anybody to heroin overdoses because they have a pragmatic harm reduction approach to things. And their hard drug addicted population is aging and shrinking, and ours is not. So we can learn from other people if we can stop legislating morality. Across the street was a machine that used to sell cigarettes, bolted to the bridge in Zurich, and now it's been rejiggered and it sells government-subsidized syringes. They're almost free. In our society, you wouldn't endorse that kind of action and give them needles. That's like saying it's okay. In Europe, they would say, they're going to shoot up anyways. Do you want them swapping needles and swapping diseases and HIV? Pragmatic harm reduction. And then down the street is an ugly scene, a heartbreaking scene. It's a heroin maintenance clinic where people go to administer their addiction. And it's nicknamed a cafe fix. And this is where people get counseling. Europe deals with this in a different way than we do. And I just find it quite inspirational. We can learn from that. Marijuana is an interesting issue. In Europe, a joint is about as exciting as a can of beer. Now, you can't paint it with broad strokes because in some countries they're more regressive than we are in marijuana. But in general in Europe, they've realized that it makes no sense to lock people up who are smoking pot. In our society today, we have 70,000 people in jail for nonviolent marijuana possession offenses. We arrested 600,000 people this year in our country in this last 12 months. 600,000 for marijuana possession, a joint in your pocket. These aren't rich white guys. These are poor people, these are black people, and these are brown people. It's a very convenient way to disenfranchise young black men in a society that, truth be told, would be more comfortable if we could diminish the vote. This is an important issue. It's flagrant racism, it's non-productive, it violates civil liberties, it's just not fair. And in our society, we're doing something about marijuana. Let me just talk for that a little bit because I work very hard about drug policy reform. I've been a board member of NORML for 15 years. I'm not pro-marijuana. Marijuana is a drug. It's dangerous. It can be abused, like alcohol. But I have a sense that the European approach to this is a little smarter than ours. In Europe, they know that there's not a big reservoir of people that would love to ruin their lives smoking pot if only it was legal. People who want to smoke pot already do. And there's never been a society that saw any correlation between how strict the laws are and how many people smoke. That's counterintuitive, and I know it's kind of hard to realize sometimes, but it's never been the case. And that was my hunch when we legalized recreational adult use of marijuana in my state in 2012. I was a leading funder, a co-sponsor, and a spokesperson for our I-502 initiative, and we legalized marijuana along with Colorado, the first political entity in the world to actually legalize tax and regulate adult recreational use of marijuana. And we just had a hunch that use would not go up, teen use would not go up, DUIs would not go up, and crime would not go up. We just were recognizing that there was a black market in our state that rivaled apples. And that's a big deal in Washington state. And this black market was marijuana, and it was enriching and empowering gangs and organized crime. And we thought if we could take that black market and turn it into a highly regulated, highly taxed legal market, you would take that power away from gangs and organized crime, you would let your law enforcement focus on serious issues, and you'd generate a lot of tax dollars. And use would not go up. That was our hope. So we legalized marijuana in 2012. The numbers are in now in Colorado and Washington. These are not numbers put together by grannies for ganja. This is what the state actually figured out. My governor and the governor of Colorado were not in favor of this law when they were elected, and now they are in favor of the status quo because the numbers are in. Adult use has stayed essentially the same. Teen use has definitely not gone up. DUIs have not gone up. Crime has not gone up. What has gone up is civil liberties and tax revenue. Last year in my state, it was a $1.4 billion legal industry employing 25,000 people, not because more people are smoking pot. That was all an illegal industry before. And this year it generated $310 million for my state capital in Olympia. $310 million. That's earmarked for drug prevention programs, drug education, and healthcare programs in our state. What's not to like about that? My governor just talked to me a month ago, and he said he's thankful he's not arresting 8,000 people he'd be arresting otherwise, and he's got $310 million a year to do very creative and important things with. So I was just here in Chicago a couple months ago helping your very progressive and thoughtful and caring state's lawmakers, because you guys are on the way to this also. And I just want to remind you, it's not pro-marijuana. I look out my window every morning, and it's not some Cheech and Chong nightmare. It's just boring now. Nobody goes to Hempfest anymore. Grandma's rubbing it on her elbow, you know? It's just not sexy anymore, and we just wonder what took us so long. So it's a gradual thing, but state by state we're taking down the prohibition against marijuana, and it's not because, just like when they ended the prohibition against alcohol, they didn't say booze is good. They just realized the laws against it were causing more pain and heartache to the society than the actual drug itself. So it's a complicated issue. Europe is dealing with it, and now we're dealing with it, and we do have a government that is very acting like it's 2010. But the numbers are in, and we know what happens now. So it's fun to, that's just my passion because I've traveled, and I thought it was strange that marijuana is such a big deal here when it's not a big deal over there. You can compare the United States and Europe in so many ways. We're both wealthy, primarily Christian, democratic, pluralistic societies, all very committed to government by, for, and of the people. I've studied it a long time, and there's differences between the United States and Europe. And what is the difference? It's hard to put your finger on it, and it occurred to me, I think we are government by, for, and of the people via the corporations that we own. It's not a judgmental statement. It's just, as a society, we like to think that the government should clear the way so our corporations can prosper and we'll be all better off for it. Great. In Europe, it's government by, for, and of the people in spite of the corporations that they own. In Europe, you'll have laws that make corporations pay for things that don't show up on our standard accounting pages that should be paid for and so on. In Europe, you pay for the disposal of your car when you buy it. That wouldn't happen here because it's not good for business. It happens over there because somebody's got to pay for it, and it just makes sense to get that taken care of early, you see. So it's a fascinating sort of thing. It's curious to me the appetite there is among a lot of powerful forces in our society to take anything that's public and turn it private. Have you thought about that lately? Think of how maddening it is to some people that something exists that's public wealth for the people. Parks, health, retirement accounts, education, infrastructure, internet, broadcasting, all of those things are just targeted because it denies somebody who's aggressive the opportunity to turn it into a business. Maybe that's smart, maybe that's not, I don't know. But in Europe, they really like the fact that certain things stay public for everybody, and it's a decision as a society that we have to make. I love to talk to my European friends who just serve as kind of soundboards. This is Ollie. You may have seen him in my TV shows. He's the only school teacher in a little town high in the Swiss Alps where everybody has the same last name. Very humble little community. And I get to talk to Ollie and his wife, and recently I was talking to them and I asked him, I said, just, Ollie, how can you Swiss people so docilely pay such high taxes? And without missing a beat, he said, well, what's it worth to live in a society where there's no hunger, no homelessness, and where everybody, regardless of the wealth of their parents, has access to quality health care and education? Now, he's not some liberal firebrand. He's a conservative guy in his community, but that's just a European sensibility because they just think it's better for the society if you have a higher safety net for people that aren't good in the capitalist game. I think we're beautiful people, compassionate people here in the United States, but we're not very good at grappling honestly with the gap between rich and poor. And I think when a society is very wealthy, but it has a big gap between rich and poor, it frays the fabric of that society. And if you don't know about that, it's really healthy to travel south of our border and see what happens when there's no middle class, when there's a lot of wealth and a lot of poverty. And I've learned in my travels that even if you're motivated only by greed, if you know what's good for you, you don't want to be filthy rich in a desperately poor world. It's not a nice place for your grandkids. And when you travel to the developing world, you realize that half of humanity is trying to live on $2 a day. I'm sorry for the downer, but half of humanity is trying to live on $2 a day. That's just a fact. In the United States, what's our average income is $50,000 a year or something like that, and we've only been growing at 2% for the last decade. So it's just not good enough. So we have to do all sorts of heroics so we can grow at 4%. But what are the long-term consequences? I mean, that would be a more enlightened approach to our affluence. When you travel with the window down and your heart open, you recognize the humanity of this. And when you go south of our border, you see what happens in a society where there's no middle class. Every hotel, every pharmacy, every bank in Honduras and Guatemala and Nicaragua, you'll find an armed guard in front of it. We're heading that way. I would bet in 10 years we're going to have armed guards in front of our special places because we're going to need them. Not because we're lawless people, but because there's no hope for people that don't have an inside track. And we have a choice to make as a society. I think this is in a little community where it was a middle-class neighborhood, and they decided to pool their wealth so they could hire an armed guard so the kids could get to the park safely. And that's what this guard was for. We don't need that here. Even if you're wealthy enough to barricade yourself behind designer fortifications, this is not a successful society. And when you travel, you realize these little girls are just as precious as our kids. I mean, a lot of people call themselves Christians, and if you're a Christian, you know we're all children of God. And why would these kids be any less valuable than ours? Now, my girl had $5,000 for braces and money left over for whitener. And I noticed that every kid in her class could scrape together $5,000 for braces and had money left over for whitener. That's not a guilt trip. We work hard. We have a winning system. Our kids get straight teeth, period. But that doesn't negate the fact that the average lot in life for mothers on this planet is to abandon their kids every morning and walk for water. And every year they have to walk farther for water. Abandoning their kids to hateful and angry forces that can turn them against the wealthy world. And for the cost of 2 sets of braces, $10,000, you could drill a well in a thirsty community, and all those moms could stay home. It's just a thought, you know. I mean, let's just say we're not motivated by Christian compassion, because that really doesn't work in our society anymore. Let's say you're motivated by your own national security. You've got to decide, we've got to decide, because we're making a decision now to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on military hardware. I want to be safe just as much as anybody in this room does. But I think we could look at soft power and hard power and decide which will make us safer. We need soldiers in Afghanistan, but I understand it costs $1 million a year to keep one extra soldier in Afghanistan. Let's think of the marginal value of one more soldier in Afghanistan, or taking that $1 million and giving 100 thirsty communities running water in a well. It'd be a trade-off. It'd be a trade-off. And then every morning, when all the moms in that town do not have to walk across the county to get water for their family, but they walk across the square and they pump fresh, beautiful water. You probably know what it's like in a little community where people go to the well and you just feel that cool, fresh, safe, life-giving water. They pump that water in the morning, every morning. What are they going to think? God bless America. That's what they're going to think. God bless America. There'll be a chorus of God bless America from poverty-stricken, formerly hopeless and disgruntled mothers, and they can stay home and love their kids and raise them with a better approach to the world. I'm not saying that we do that because we're compassionate or have any kind of Christian values. I'm saying that would make us safer. It's not going to happen. We're going to spend $100 billion on another couple of aircraft carriers, you know, because you make money on that. Different people make money here, you know the whole story there. But if you really wanted to be safer, if that was all about, you could give soft power a little extra consideration. Now, these are the kind of things that you think of when you travel. Thomas Jefferson said, travel makes a person wiser if less happy. Thomas Jefferson was a smart and thoughtful person. I don't want to go to my grave with a scrapbook of smiley faces. I want to go to my grave having an appetite for the reality on this planet and making a difference. Muhammad said, don't tell me how much you've traveled. Or no, don't tell me how educated you are. Tell me how much you've traveled. I just love that. Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. I just think travel gives us that most beautiful souvenir, and that's a broader perspective, and we take that home. Here's an example. This is the last thing I'm going to talk, and then I'll have a few minutes for questions after that. But as a tour guide in Turkey, Turkey's a great place if you're ever a tour guide, because it's just, everything is interesting. I wanted to introduce my American tourists to a dervish. You know those guys that whirl? And my group is in the hotel, and I'm running around town looking for a dervish. I'll just paraphrase this for you. in kind of a silly way, but I'll paraphrase it in a way that it happened. I found a dervish. I said, "Hi, I'm an American tour guide, and I've got 20 people in the hotel, and we'd love to watch you whirl. Can we watch you?" And he said, "I'm not a photo op. I'm a dervish. I'm a monk." And he said, "But if you want to watch me pray, I'll let you, as long as I can explain to you what I'm doing." I said, "Perfect. When and where?" "Sundown on my rooftop." Okay. I gathered my group. We went over to his place. Sun was going down. He comes out and welcomes us. And he says, "Welcome. I am a dervish. You Christians would call that a monk. My prophet is Mevlana. I think you call him Rumi. He's kind of like the Saint Francis for us Muslims, the prophet of love. Everybody can embrace the teaching of Saint Francis, and everybody can embrace the teaching of Rumi." And he said, 5 times a day, I whirl myself into a meditative trance, meditating on the teaching of Rumi, and I want to become a conduit of God's love. I plant one foot in my community, my hometown, my family, my loved ones, and the other foot goes around the world celebrating the diversity in God's great creation. And one hand goes up to accept the love of our Heavenly Father. And the other hand, like the spout on a tea kettle, goes down and showers God's love on His creation. My family, my community, and all of the diversity in His creation. And I whirl, and I lose myself in that thought. And we watched him, and his head tilted over, and his robe billowed out. And he lost himself in that beautiful teaching, and he did what he could to become a conduit of God's love. And then I remember as the tour guide looking over at my group and seeing the wonder sweep over their faces. And I thought, this is good travel. We got out of our comfort zone. We've met somebody who was kind of confusing and a little bit freaky to us. And we go home now a little less afraid and a little better connected to our world. We take home that most beautiful souvenir, a broader perspective. And then, when we implement that broader perspective here in this great nation of ours, we're making travel a political act. And I think that has never been more important. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Thanks. Thank you. Gracias. Dankeschön. Thank you. All right. Hey, thank you so much. I know I've talked a long time, and I don't want to keep you too long, but I would like to just take 10 minutes for Q&A, and I promise I'll just limit it to 10 minutes, and then I got to hop in my car and go to San Francisco for another talk, and you guys all got to go home. Question here. So what is the big change in 20 years from technology, and we live in this globalized society? What's the vibe? What I'm so impressed by is when I read my journals that I wrote when I was 20 years old, and if I read somebody's journals today and I think about the experience of a student has today, it's essentially the same thing. The magic, the value of travel is precisely the same. Now we're always connected with our iPhones. We've got Google Maps. You know, everybody's got the same coins in their pocket. The language barrier is almost non-existent. All of that stuff makes it easier. But the humanity of travel and the value of travel is the same. And the magic for the wide-eyed, young-at-heart traveler, I say young at heart because it could be of any age, it's still the same. It's that big leap to go to leave our norm and to put yourself in a situation where you're stimulated by people who find different truths to be the norm. And I just think that's just great news. And I know that you guys have a busy foreign study program here, and that's the whole rationale, I think, for traveling. Yes? I would never go to North Korea. I'm not interested. I'm not some sort of a hothead that goes to dangerous places and wants to survive them. I just canceled out of a trip to Egypt because I don't think it's safe right now. But I go to places that I think are where we can be steep on the learning curve, and places maybe we're not supposed to go, but you know, that we just don't understand what is the risk. I went to Cuba with my family a year ago and had a wonderful time. Went to Iran, I had a rich experience. I went to Palestine last time I went to Israel, and I just thought it's so beautiful to go to the Holy Land and hear the Israeli perspective and hear the Palestinian perspective. Those places are just very valuable places to go. And I just think it's important for us to, personally, when we have the opportunity to go out there. It's kind of like, we're sort of like the jester. You know, in the Middle Ages, the king gave the jester room and board, and what was his responsibility? To go outside of the castle and hang out with the peasants in the barrio and learn about the jokes they were telling and what did they really think. And then he came back into the castle and he told the king the truth, and the king appreciated that, even though it was annoying. We can be the medieval the modern day equivalent of the jester in our travels. By the way, I want to mention that if you want to have any more information about any of this, my website is just, everything is free on it, and we've got 150 shows there that you can just click and watch. If you wanted to see the Iran show, if you want to see the Holy Land show, if you want to see my Martin Luther and the Reformation show, or I did a 1-hour show on Cuba, it's all there on our website. You know, and of course all of our regular European shows. So you can go to ricksteves.com. And I know a lot of you picked up our newsletter as you came in, and our tour brochure. That's on the table in the back if you didn't get them. I think there's still some out there. I know the DVDs that we were handing out all got taken up. I didn't have so many of them. But all of the lectures that are on that DVD are available for free at ricksteves.com. Okay, any other question? Yes? You know, I said India is my favorite place to go. India just rearranges all my cultural furniture. It wallops my ethnocentricity. I love being in India. And I would never want to take a group there because it's just too personal. I can take a group to Denmark or Ireland, and I know you're going to see this and that and this. It'll be all very, you know, straightforward. But in India, it's more of a personal thing, and I really wouldn't want to be a tour operator there. And I'm committed just to doing Europe because that's the big market, and that's, I want people to take a baby step. First go to Europe, and then you can go beyond that. Yes? What should you what? Avoid. What should you avoid in Amsterdam? Falling into the canal. That's all I can think of. No, Amsterdam is, it's a fascinating social experiment. A lot of people think prostitution and marijuana when they go to Amsterdam, you know, but, you know, that's just part of it. Amsterdam has a long history of tolerance. Jews were welcome in Amsterdam when they were welcome nowhere else. Catholics could worship when they were ruled by Protestants, and Protestants could worship when they were ruled by Catholics. It's just a fascinating history, and it's a fascinating heritage. I've got 3 really good walks on my app that are free that you can follow around in Amsterdam. And when I go to Amsterdam, I rent a bike on the first hour that I'm there, and I keep the bike for the whole time. I can get around in town. If you're feeling comfortable on a bike in a big city, I get around faster in Amsterdam by bike than if I had a taxi waiting for me all the time. It's just in Munich, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, and Stockholm, having a rental bike is really, really nice. Question here. Is there anywhere I haven't been that piques my interest? Oh, yeah. I mean, all over. I've never been to South America. I've never been to Sub-Saharan Africa. There's lots I want to do in Asia. I love Southeast Asia. But I love my work. Can you imagine how fun it is to write a guidebook and then have 30,000 people use it? And if somebody said you can have a all-expenses-paid trip to Fiji, I want to go to South Pacific so bad, and it'll take you 10 days. I'd say, no, I really would rather spend 10 days in Spain updating my guidebook there. So right now I'm in a workaholic kind of stage, and this is my mission, is to make my material really good, as good as I can. Yeah? Is Barcelona going to be safe? Let me check. Yeah, I think it's going to be safe. No, I was in Barcelona last couple months ago when they just were having all the riots there and stuff, and it's perfectly safe. It looks dangerous when you see it on the news, but there's 1 million people in Barcelona. Nobody got killed. And if you want to go in the middle of the demonstrations, you know, you get some interesting experiences and memories and photographs. Most people would rather stay away from it. We took 1,000 tours around Europe last year, navigating all sorts of, you know, demonstrations and so on. And I just feel like you got to look for trouble to get yourself into anything dangerous in Europe. If you use common sense. But I wouldn't worry about Barcelona. In fact, if I lived in Chicago, I would probably go there sooner rather than later. Yes.
I travel solo and I've traveled with groups. One thing I always come back and I kind of assess my trip when I come back, and engaging with locals is always there. I wish I would do more of it. What is your secret to try to engage local people whether you're solo or with a group?
Well, that's a real good question. That's what distinguishes, she's saying, what's the secret to connecting with locals, one-on-one? And to me, the mark of a good trip is how many people do you meet. It's people that carbonates the experience. When I'm making a TV show, a tour, or a guidebook, or on my own vacation, how many people are we going to meet? I have enough money where I can hire a private guide, so I have a little advantage. If you can afford a guide or you can share with a couple couples, it's just such a luxury, because there you have a friend who loves to talk, and that's kind of, you're paying them to be your friend, how you travel determines how many people you meet. Some people are expert at it, others have to work at it. But you got to know a little bit about this. If you go to a pub in Ireland and you sit at a table, people are going to leave you alone. But if you sit at the bar, people are going to want to talk to you. And that's just the etiquette there. So if you sit at the bar, you're interested in connecting. There's plenty of ways to meet locals. As a tourist, you also meet other travelers, which is a beautiful thing. I like food tours. All over Europe, every city now has food tours. It costs about twice what dinner's going to cost, but you visit 8 spots and you have a mobile feast with a local guide, and you get to know 8 other tourists from all over the world. And by the end of it, you're all friends. And it's just a wonderful experience. So there's good ways to meet friends, meet people in your travels. The theme of my newsletter that I had on the table out there is the experiences that Europe has to offer, talking about how you can connect with people rather than seeing tired cliches on stage. So you're right, that's something you got to look at. And I think if you're a solo traveler, you're much more approachable than if you're with a big group. Big groups are designed to see the cliches on stage. 8 tour buses here, and I'm going to do my slap dancing and yodeling, and then you're going to go back to your American-style hotel and talk about the, baseball. If you're on your own, that's where you really are liable to end up with some local friends. 2 more questions in the back.
Yes. I don't think you've talked about Europe's use of alternate energy.
You're right. I did not talk about Europe's use of alternate energy. And I would love to do that. One of my new things is I want to make alternate energy, or just sort of a Europe social awareness tour from Stockholm to Copenhagen to Hamburg to Amsterdam. And just to do that swath across Europe and learn about all of these environmental policies they have and so on. Europe is really into environmentalism, and there are many communities that are racing to be 100% wind powered, and they're well on their way to that. So there's a lot of solar power and a lot of wind power, and it's subsidized by the government. Another interesting thing is to see how Europe is coping with climate change. It's fascinating when you go around Europe and you see how they're investing in their infrastructure just in anticipation of rising sea levels. The Dutch are famously frugal. They're not going to waste billions of euros just because of some fake news, but they have just they're raising all their dikes. This is a huge project. I was just in Rotterdam, and they've got this storm surge barrier that's as big as 2 Eiffel Towers on their side on wheels. And when they have a threat of high water, they roll it together and protect 1 million people. And then when the threat goes away, they roll the storm surge barrier out, and the ships can come and go. We need to have, maybe they're just fools, and maybe we should just think we're fine. But Europe is preparing for a future with higher sea. In Hamburg, they just raised 30 miles of levees around the town and landscaped it. It's like a park. It's not an eyesore, but it's the new way you gotta be. And the new buildings all are on stilts, where you just have floodable parking on the bottom, because they're going to have a lot of floods in the future. So there's plenty of things you could do in your travels to be tuned into that, depending on what you're interested in. One last question. Yes?
Not a question, just a comment. Speaking as an anthropologist, you make a darn good anthropologist yourself.
Oh, anthropology. I'm going to look that word up. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. So, thank you. Okay. So I just want to thank Elmhurst College for putting this together. It's a lot of work when something gets snowed out, and they were so committed to all of your experience that they worked very hard to rebook this, and it's just great you're all able to flex with that. And I've thoroughly enjoyed these last couple hours. I hope you have too, and I'm sorry I have to run, but happy travels. Thank you very much. Thank you.